Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, classmates. Now we are going to discuss our assigned topic, which is all about philosophical perspective. So, before that, I'm Jerica Imata, the first reporter. Objectives. At the end of these modules, you are expected to A. Articulate the various philosophical views about the self. B. Examine one's thoughts and experiences according to the philosophical views about the self. C. Propose and answer to the question, Who am I? Many philosophers grapple to understand the meaning of human life. They have attempted to answer the question, Who am I? And most of their views have influenced the way we look at our lives today. Dito muna tayo kay Socrates. Socrates, one of the famous philosophers, he was a scholar, a teacher na nag-influence sa napakaraming thinkers all throughout the generation. He was also considered as the father of Western philosophy. Here Socrates insisted that the unexamined life is not worth living. This is perhaps the most satisfying philosophical assertion that Socrates claimed in order to protect human beings from the shallowness of living their lives. An examined life is a life that is duty-bound to develop self-knowledge and self-dignified, with values and integrity. Not only that, living a good life means having the wisdom to distinguish what is right from wrong. Socrates further argued that the unexamined life is no better off than animal life. Ibig sabihin, kung hindi alam ng isang tao kung ano nga ba ang purpose niya sa buhay, ay maaring hindi niya makuha ang magandang buhay. Ang tao na marunong tumingin sa tama at maling gawain ay puno ng dangal ang kanyang pagkatao. Ibig sabihin, hindi siya gagawa ng bagay na hindi magandang epekto sa kanya, pati na rin sa iba. Lagi niyang pinag-iisipan ang kanyang mga gagawin kung ito ba ay maganda o hindi. Ang pamumuhay ng marangal ay simbolo ng karunungan ng isang tao. Hindi rin worth it ang iyong buhay kung ikaw ay nabubuhay lang. Hindi tayo hayop na matutulog lang, kakain lang, manganganak lang. Pagkatapos ay wala nang iisipin. We are human na may paninindigan sa buhay. Para maging isang fully human, dapat ay gamitin natin ang ating kakayahan na mag-isip tungo sa kabutihan at alam natin ang tama sa maling gawain. Sabi ni Socrates, unexamined life is not worth living. This is true because if we don't examine our life, mahirapan tayo na i-lead yung life natin. Mahirapan tayo na ma-attain yung sinasabi ni Socrates na good life. For example, mahirapan tayo na malaman yung course natin kasi di tayo nagbigay ng time and efforts na kilalanin kung ano nga ba yung strength natin at kung ano nga ba yung skill natin at abilities. Kaya mas maganda na talagang kinikilala o ini-examine natin yung sarili natin. Kasi if we know those things, madali na lang sa atin kung ano ang next steps na gagawin natin. Pero kung hindi natin ini-examine ang buhay natin, parang sasabihin natin sa sarili natin kung ano nga ba ang gagawin natin sa buhay or kung saan nga ba ang landas natin. Kaya yun yung mahirap dun. Kaya nga ini-encourage tayo ni Socrates na i-examine ang buhay natin para it's worth living. Kasi kapag kilala natin ang ating sarili, we know what to do next. We know where are we going. Also according to Socrates, every one of us is composed of two aspects which is the body and soul. Yung body natin according to Socrates is imperfect. Kasi may mga flaws tayo and impermanent kasi walang forever sa mundo. Ang yung soul naman is permanent and perfect. Ang sinasabi dito ni Socrates na soul is that the soul are thinking and willing subject. We can assume that the soul is the intellectual and moral personality of human person. Kaya for Socrates, soul is the seat of knowledge and ignorance, of goodness and badness. That's why, for Socrates, to think and will, which is basically the soul is essence of human person through self. According to Socrates, alagaan natin ang soul natin. Kaya importante na alagaan ang ating soul because according to Socrates, we need to attain the good life. For us to be able to attain the good life, we need to become wise and virtuous. Sabi nga ni Socrates that good life is attained through acquisition and knowledge, wisdom, and virtue. So, ibig sabihin, we need to exert our effort and energy para maalagaan natin yung mga souls natin. Dito naman tayo kay Plato. Plato is also a Greek philosopher born in Athens during classical period in ancient Greece. For Plato, the psyche is composed of three elements. These are the appetitive, spirited, and the mind. Number 1. The appetitive element of the psyche include one desires, pleasures, physical, comforts, etc. So, dito sa number 1, which is appetitive element, yan ang mga bagay na gusto nating gawin na alam nating magiging masaya tayo o magiging payapa. Yung walang iniisip na problema, puro lamang kasiyahan. Number 2. The spirited element is part of the psyche that is excited when given challenges or fights back when agitated or fights for justice when unjust practices are evident. In a way, this is the hot-blooded part of the psyche. Sa number 2 naman, which is itong spirited element, dito tayo nabibigyan ng mga challenges. For example, gusto kong gumala o kaya niyaya ko ng mga kaibigan ko na mag-outing. Ngunit may kailangan akong gawin na dapat talaga bigyan ng efforts o focus. So dito ako nag-iisip o kaya itatanong ko sa sarili ko kung ano nga ba ang maaari kong gawin. Number 3, the mind. However, is what Plato considers as the most superior of all the elements. He refers to this element as the nous, which means the conscious awareness of the self. The nous is the superpower that controls the affairs of the self. It decides, analyzes, thinks ahead, proposes what is best, and rationally controls both appetitive and spirited elements of the psyche. So number 3 naman, which is yung mind, yun yung nagko-control both appetitive and spirited elements. So dito tayo mapapaisip sa makabubuti para sa atin. Like pipiliin ko yung paggawa ng schoolworks ko o assignments kaysa sa paggala. Kasi yung paggala pwede ipagpaliban. Pero yung pag-aaral once in a lifetime lang yan. So you better choose the right decision. Another example. We take as an example, college to illustrate Plato's psyche. College students want to hang out with their friends, spend time on computer games, eat the favorite food, do thrilling activities that will excite the whole gang. These satisfy the appetitive elements of the psyche. However, when professors throw challenging projects and assignments that would require tremendous time and effort, the spirited psyche kicks in to face the challenges head-on. All these are going on the mind or the nous to a person has. In other words, in order to have a good life, one has to develop his nous and feel it to win the understanding of the limit of the self and ethical standards. Kung mapapansin sa picture, utter nonsense is yung mga bagay na hindi naman masyadong importante, ngunit yun yung nagpapasaya sa atin. Dito naman sa left side, yun yung mga responsibilities natin sa buhay na kailangan natin gawin. So, yung mind natin is nagko-control, kung baga, siya yung nagbibigay action tungo sa magandang desisyon. And that's all about my assigned topic. And the next reporter, we're going to continue the other part.
Good morning, everyone. I am Kati Danke. I will discuss about the two philosophers that aside to me. Another concrete example of a highly self-controlled nous is the life of Saint Augustine. Saint Augustine was born on November 13, 354 BC in Tagaste, Africa. He succumbed to vices and pleasures of the world. Augustine was unsettled and restlessly searched for the meaning of his life until his conversion to Christianity. In his Confessions, he pronounced, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it finds rest in you." So what is St. Augustine best known for? St. Augustine was the bishop of Hippo from 396 to 430, a renowned theologian and prolific writer. He was also a skilled preacher and rhetorician. He is one of the Latin Fathers of the Church, and in Roman Catholicism is formally recognized as a doctor of the Church. Augustine returned to his homeland and embraced an ascetic life. He dedicated his Christian life to the pursuit of contemplative ideals. He practiced extreme self-denial and self-mortification. Later, he was elected as Bishop of Hippo. He fought bravely the errors of his time through his sermons and many writings. He died in 430 BC and later was declared doctor of the Church. The development of the self for St. Augustine is achieved through self-presentation and self-realization. He was afraid to accept to himself and tell the people about his sinfulness. However, the realization of the wasted self is achieved through his conversion to the faith. Thus, his journey toward the understanding of the self was centered on his religious convictions and beliefs. Here is the famous line of St. Augustine: "Faith is to believe what you do not see. The reward of this faith is to see what you believe. Pray as though everything depended on God. Work as though everything depended on you." René Descartes was born on March 31, 1596 in Le Havre, France. His parents was Joachim and Jane Descartes, and his mother died shortly after Descartes turned 1. He and his siblings were raised by their grandmother, while his father was busy with work and as a council member in the provincial parliament. Descartes never married, but he fathered a child in 1635 with Helena Jans van der Stroom. The child named Francine, but died at age of 5 because of fever. René Descartes, also the father of modern philosophy, he deviated from theocentric philosophies in the years before him. He was in fact able to redress the question concerning the self in a very different, rational method. He started his quest of discovering the self by his methodic thought. In his mediation on first philosophy, Descartes claimed that he cannot really own our senses because our sense perceptions can often deceive us. There are many times when we hear something when in fact there is nothing, and that we are deceived by our sense of hearing. Descartes stated that to doubt whether the events experiences at the moment are only products of his dreams and therefore illusions. He started to doubt about every realities that he had been accepting as true and only illusionary creations of an evil genius who designed all these false impressions in the world. Eventually, Descartes slept nothing but his doubt. That's all, thank you. Next reporter.
Good morning, ma'am and classmates. Before we proceed our topic, who is John Locke? John Locke was an English philosopher and physician widely regarded as one of the most influential Enlightenment thinkers and commonly known as the father of liberalism. Born on August 29, 1632 in Rington, United Kingdom. Died on October 28 in Higher Level, United Kingdom. Locke opposed the idea that only reason is the source of knowledge of the self. His proposition is that the self is comparable to an empty space where everyday experiences contribute to the pile of knowledge that is put forth on that empty space. Experience, therefore, is an important requirement in order to have sense data which, through the process of reflection and analysis, eventually becomes sense perception. For Locke, all knowledge comes exclusively through experience. Locke defines knowledge as the connection and agreement or disagreement and repugnancy of the ideas Hume's form from this definition. It follows that our knowledge does not extend beyond the scope of human ideas. It has to be noted that the validity of sense perception is very subjective. Perception is changing from one individual to another. For example, when one read a text message, "Congratulations, you won 1 million pesos in an online lottery," from an unknown number, one text receiver may hastily reply in excitement and elation, while the other text receiver may just totally ignore it as a hoax or even threat is a virus. Perception, therefore, is very subjective to Locke. This provides the most lenient leeway for every individual to be independent in self-examination, self-management, and self-control. The individual person, for Locke, is not only capable of learning from experience but also is skillful enough to process different perceptions from various experiences to form a more complex idea. These ideas then will become the key to understand complex realities about the self and the world. No man's knowledge here can go beyond his experience. So, about that, for the human race to acquire knowledge, they must experience different things without doing, seeing, feeling, smelling, or hearing. Man cannot learn. Man's coming of age experience will push them to good or evil. Next, Hume. Who is Hume? David Hume, born on May 7, April 26 in Old Style, in 1711 in Edinburgh, Scotland. Died August 25, 1776, Edinburgh. Scottish philosopher, historian, economist, and essayist, known especially for his philosophical empiricism and skepticism. Hume conceived of philosophy as the inductive experimental science of human nature. Hume claimed that there cannot be a persisting idea of the self, while Hume agreed that all ideas are derived from impressions. Problematically, it follows that the idea of the self is also derived from impressions. However, impressions are subjective, temporary, provisional, prejudicial, and even skewed, and therefore cannot be persisting, because the self must be a constant, persisting, stable thing, and yet all knowledge is derived from impressions which are transient, non-persisting, variable things. It follows that we do not really have knowledge of a self, and therefore there is no self, or at least we should be agnostic on the issue. Inasmuch as we wanted to be persistent, constant, and stable with our knowledge about ourselves, Hume asserted that this is just impossible as long as we derive our knowledge from impressions. There will never be self. This means that for Hume, all we know about ourselves are just bundles of temporary impressions. Perhaps this supports the difficulty of answering the questions, who am I? Because what we can readily answer the impressions such as name, height, color of hair, affiliations, skills, achievements, and the like. All these are temporary and non-persisting. In fact, Hume harshly claimed that there is no self. Hume thinks that each of our ideas is either copied from a simple impressions or is built up entirely from simple ideas that are so copied. If our minds cannot reproduce our simple impressions by forming simple ideas copied from that, then we would not form my ideas at all. Ad next reporter, Mark Anthony Montaño. Good morning, ma'am and classmates. Before we proceed our topic, who is John Locke? John Locke was an English philosopher and physician widely regarded as one of the most influential Enlightenment thinkers and commonly known as the father of liberalism. Born on August 29, 1632 in Rington, United Kingdom. Died on October 28 in Higher Level, United Kingdom. Locke opposed the idea that only reason is the source of knowledge of the self. His proposition is that the self is comparable to an empty space where everyday experiences contribute to the pile of knowledge that is put forth on that empty space. Experience, therefore, is an important requirement in order to have sense data which, through the process of reflection and analysis, eventually becomes sense perception. For Locke, all knowledge comes exclusively through experience. Locke defines knowledge as the connection and agreement or disagreement and repugnancy of the ideas used formed from this definition. It follows that our knowledge does not extend beyond the scope of human ideas. It has to be noted that the validity of sense perception is very subjective. Perception is changing from one individual to another. For example, when one read a text message, "Congratulations, you won 1 million pesos in an online lottery," from an unknown number, one text receiver may hastily reply in excitement and elation, while the other text receiver may just totally ignore it as a hoax or even threat is a virus. Perception, therefore, is very subjective to Locke. This provides the most lenient way for every individual to be independent in self-examination, self-management, and self-control. The individual person, for Locke, is not only capable of learning from experience but also skillful enough to process different perceptions from various experiences to form a more complex idea. These ideas then will become the key to understand complex realities about the self and the world. No man's knowledge here can go beyond his experience. So, about that, for the human race to acquire knowledge, they must experience different things without doing, seeing, feeling, smelling, or hearing. Man cannot learn man's coming of age. Experience will push them to good or evil. Next, Hume. Who is Hume? David Hume, born on May 7, April 26 in Old Style, in 1711 in Edinburgh, Scotland. Died August 25, 1776, Edinburgh. Scottish philosopher, historian, economist, and essayist, known especially for his philosophical empiricism and skepticism. Hume conceived of philosophy as the inductive experimental science of human nature. Hume claimed that there cannot be a persisting idea of the self, while Hume agreed that all ideas are derived from impressions. Problematically, it follows that the idea of the self is also derived from impressions. However, impressions are subjective, temporary, provisional, prejudicial, and even skewed, and therefore cannot be persisting, because the self must be a constant, persisting, stable thing, and yet all knowledge is derived from impressions which are transient, non-persisting, variable things. It follows that we do not really have knowledge of a self, and therefore there is no self or at least we should be agnostic on the issue. In as much as we wanted to be persistent, constant and stable with our knowledge about ourselves, Hume asserted that this is just impossible as long as we derive our knowledge from impressions. There will never be self. This means that for Hume, all we know about ourselves are just bundles of temporary impressions. Perhaps this supports the difficulty of answering the questions, who am I? Because what we can readily answer the impressions such as name, height, color of hair, affiliations, skills, achievements, and the like. All these are temporary and non-persistent. In fact, Hume harshly claimed that there is no self. Hume thinks that each of our ideas is either copied from a simple impressions or is built up entirely from simple ideas that are so copied. If our minds cannot reproduce our simple impressions by forming simple ideas copied from them, then we will not form my ideas at all. And next reporter, Mark Anthony Montaño.
Good day everyone, I'm Mark Anthony Montaño and I'm going to report. Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant was a German philosopher and one of the central thinker Enlightenment, born in Königsberg. Kant comprehensive, systematic works in epistemology, metaphysics, ethics, aesthetics have made him influential figure in the modern Western philosophy. Immanuel Kant, born in April 22, 1724 in Königsberg, died February 12, 1804. Kant further argues that even we element everything, or in the case of Descartes, without everything, there will still be space, time will remain as. There are categories that cannot be outside of the selves. They help provide perceptions of the selves. Perception here does not belong to the world. It belongs to the self through temporal spatial faculty. Rightly, Kant is able to claim that all the things in the world of themselves and part of them belong to the selves. This is possible because the mind possesses the order and the unity of our raw sensations. In other words, things in itself cannot be provided the idea, but it's only the spatial faculty of the self that makes the idea sensible. In short, Kant is only saying that rationally unifies that makes sense perceptions we have, and our experience that makes sensible ideas about ourselves and the world. This indigenous synthesis saves empirical theories of science and rational justifications innate ideas. Kant also solved the problem of the ability of the selves perceive the world. Immanuel Kant and his moral philosophy, his philosophy of freedom. Without human freedom, truth, Kant, moral appraisal and moral responsibility would be impossible. Kant believes that if a person could not act otherwise, then he also can have no moral worth. Sigmund Freud was an Austrian neurologist and the Foundation's psychoanalysis clinical method for evaluating and treating pathologies. In the psych-through dialogue between patients and psychoanalysis, Freud was born to Galician Jewish parents in the Moravian town of the Freiburg in the Austrian Empire. Sigmund Freud, born May 6, 1886, in Freiburg, Czechia, died September 23, 1939. Sigmund Freud eliminated the victory insisted on the complexity of the selves. Freud, refusing to take self or subject technical terms regarded the selves as the I, the ordinary, contribute the mental, physical actions. So we can say, I run, I eat, I decide. I feel tingling sensations. Or I refuse to check because it's wrong. Admittedly the question, who am I? I will not provide the victorious, unified answer but complicated, diverse features of the moral judgment and the sensations. Broadly, movements of perceptions, I will never be the same, that it will continue to change over time. In other words, Freud sees the I as a product of multiple interacting process, system, and schemes. To demonstrate this, Freud proposed two models, the topographical model and structural model, in Watson 2014. Topographical model, according to Freud, concept of hysteria, the individual persons may both know and do not know certain things at the same time. We may say, for example, that we know disadvantage and appearance of missing classes without any reason. But we are not really sure why we still do it in a way. We are certain about the many wrongs that may be brought about premarital sex, EI, early pregnancy, sexual transmitted infections, ruined relationship, and depressions. But we never understand why there is something somewhere inside us that makes many of us that we may know is wrong. Structural model. Similar to these integrations of the selves, the topographical model, Freud's structural model will also represent the self and different agency. 1. The idea is known as a primitive or instinct component. 2. Ego is described by Freud as the part of the ID which has been modified by direct influence of the external world. 3. The superego synthesis. The moral values and system in society in order to function as the control, outpost, or the instinctive desires of the ID. MacLeod 2007. That's all, everyone, and thank you.
Hi, I'm Nino Dominic Pialaman, and here is my topic. Ryle said that thinking I will never be found because it is just a ghost in the machine. It means he finds the philosophy of Descartes totally absurd. The mind is never separate from the body. He proposed that physical actions or behaviors are dispositions of the self. These dispositions are derived from our inner private experiences. In other words, we will only be able to understand the self based from the external manifestation, behaviors, expressions, language, desire, and the like. The mind, therefore, is nothing but a disposition of the self. Gilbert Ryle was a British philosopher, principally known for his critique of Cartesian dualism, for which he coined the phrase "ghost in the machine." He was a representative of the generation of British ordinary language philosophers who shared Ludwig Wittgenstein's approach to philosophical problems. So, Ryle asserted that the thinking I will never be discovered because it is impossible to find. He is just a ghost in the machine, which means he discovers the philosophy. Descartes is completely absurd. The mind is never separate from the body. He suggested that physical actions or behaviors are inclinations of the self. These attitudes are derived from our inner private encounters. To put it another way, we will only be able to comprehend the self through external manifestations such as behaviors, expressions, language, desire, and so on and so on. As a result, is nothing more than a disposition of the self. For Churchland, These philosophical and psychological directions will eventually be abandoned only to be replaced by a more acceptable trend in a neuroscience that provides explanation on how the brain works. Paul Montgomery Churchland was born on October 21, 1942. He is a Canadian philosopher known for his studies in neurophilosophy and the philosophy of mind. These philosophical and political issues are important to Churchland. Eventually, psychological directions will be established, abandoned only to be replaced by a more suitable candidate in neuroscience that is acceptable, gives an explanation of how the brain functions. The position is a direct attack against the folk psychology. Eliminative materialism sees that failure of folk psychology in explaining basic concepts such as sleep, learning, mental illness, and the like. Given the length of time that these sciences have investigated these concepts, and yet there is no definitive explanation offered to understand the mind that is tantamount to explanatory poverty. It is not remotely impossible that folk psychology will be replaced by neurobiology, as the Churchlands wanted to predict when people wanted to ask what is going on with themselves. They might as well go to MRI scan or CT scan to understand the present condition of the brain and how it currently works. This viewpoint is a direct challenge to popular psychology. Eliminative materialism sees folk psychology as failing to explain basic concepts. Sleep, learning, mental illness, and other similar concepts are discussed. Given the situation, the amount of time these sciences have spent researching these ideas. Despite this, no definitive explanation for the phenomenon has been offered. That is tantamount to explanatory poverty in my opinion. It's true. It's not impossible that folk psychology will be replaced by modern psychology. The Churchlands wanted to be able to predict when people would arrive. They might as well inquire as to what is going on with themselves if they wanted to. MRI or CT scans can be used to determine the current state of your body, the brain, and how it functions at the moment. Merleau-Ponty rejected classical empiricism because it eliminates the indeterminate complexities of experience that may have an effect on perception. In the same way, he also rejected the idealist intellectual position because it will only falsify perception based on one's biases and prejudices. What Merleau-Ponty proposes is treating perception as a causal process. It simply means that our perceptions are caused by the intricate experiences of the self, and processed intellectually while distinguishing truthful perception from illusory. Therefore, the self is taken as a phenomenon of the whole, a Gestalt understanding of perceptual analysis. Maurice Jean-Jacques Merleau-Ponty was a French phenomenological philosopher, strongly influenced by Edmond Husserl and Martin Heidegger. Born on March 14, 1908 in Rochefort. Merleau-Ponty scorned classical empiricism because it ignores the importance of experience, the ambiguous complexities of experience that may have an influence on perception in the same way. He turned down the offer because it will only distort perception. It is an idealist intellectual position. based on one's prejudices and biases. What did Merleau-Ponty say? Proposes that perception be treated as a causal process. It's that simple. Means that our perceptions are influenced by the complexities of the world around us. Self-experiences that are intellectually processed while recognizing the difference between true and false perceptually consequently. The self is viewed as a gestalt phenomenon arising from the whole. Perceptual analysis is a concept that needs to be grasped. And that's all. Thank you for listening.